Hey gang, I am Joe Edelman and welcome to the Last Frame Live. If you're watching live, leave me a note in the chat. Let me know who you are and where you are watching from. And if you're watching the replay, no worries. Drop a comment below the video so that I know you were here. Already, we got a crew here tonight. We got Lynn in New York. Jay is in Southern Colorado. Calvin up in Maine. FN89 out in Washington. Jeff is here from Maryland. First time here live. Awesome. Gabe in Miami. Good to see you, Gabe. Madeline in the UK. Let's see, I got Joe in Vista, California. Pateo is here. Gosh, I think it's Switzerland. Pateo is from there. It is. Yep, Switzerland. Awesome. So I appreciate all of you. Let's go ahead. Let's dive right in with the news. And I'm thrilled to report there's really nothing of consequence to report in photography news this week. But of course, Sony has a big announcement scheduled for next week. So this calm is only going to last for a little while. Plus, I think Tamron, the rumors are Tamron's got some cool stuff that's coming up real soon. So just to give you guys a quick heads, how about if Joe hits the right buttons? Okay, some presentations that I have coming up real soon. First of all, August 29th, that's next week. I've got my last of, whoops, let's get that back. My goodness, we are not doing well here with the buttons tonight. Sorry, I got an extra screen in my way, and that's my own fault, making excuses. There it is, right? So, August 29th. My last of 3 presentations that I'm doing for Daisie. It's not to say that there won't be more down the road, but the 3 that were scheduled. Competition is a choice, and I'm not going to lie to you. This is a topic that I'm passionate about. I've been known to rant about this topic. I just feel like it drives me nuts when photographers talk about their competition, and that's regardless of whether they're trying to make money or whether they are just posting pictures on social media and comparing themselves to everybody. It's a problem. It's a big problem. So I'm going to break it down, give you a lot of tips, suggestions, recommendations for how to deal with competition. One that is not listed on my page yet, and by the way, let me go ahead and share the link. It is in the description below the video, but for those of you that are here live, I'll give you that. One that's coming up September 8th. So watch my socials or bookmark this page. I will be getting the information online within the next day or two as soon as I can get them to give it to me. I am going to be doing a webinar with Vanelli from Skylum, all about honestly editing and why you need to edit and the creative potential behind editing. And when I say editing, I mean simply the idea of processing your images and the importance of it. So that's coming up September 8th. September 12th, I've got my virtual presentation on creative portraits with color gels. That's a fun one. September 14th, Understanding Creativity to Improve Your Photography out in Pasco, Washington for the Tri-Cities Camera Club. And this one I wanted to mention because all of you can attend this and it's free. September 28th, so it's the end of the month coming up. Abstract Photography, Creating Art Without Rules. This is being sponsored by Murphy's Camera in Kentucky and also Tamron. So it's online. It is live. It's in person. Well, in person, me like doing it at the time. It's not recorded. But you can sign up for free. In fact, I will share the link for those of you that are here live, but it's also on that page. And just because it's an opportunity for me to talk about another regional camera store, again, Murphy's 2 locations in Kentucky, Louisville, and I should know the other one, and I don't, but you'll find it. Actually, we'll find it on their website together. How about if we do that? Let's see, locations. Murphy's is in Louisville and Lexington, Kentucky. There you go. Listen, you know that I routinely either travel around the country to present at different photo retailers or I do stuff virtually. These folks are the people that you really need to be giving business to. Look, B&H is amazing, right? B&H, they've got everything. One of the things that B&H has done historically for the industry is they've really kind of established bottom line pricing. So you don't really have to shop around a lot to make sure that you're getting the best prices and that. Pretty much everybody is on the same pricing structure now in our industry, which makes it pretty easy, right? But here's the thing, while B&H does a tremendous job of online education, and in fact, B&H is bringing back what used to be Photo Plus as the Build Expo this year. It's happening the beginning of September. Your local camera stores, they invest in you, right? They're there to help you, especially when you're getting started, when you're trying to learn. And I'm not going to lie to you, if you have the option of going to an event at your local camera store, or you know what, just walking into your local camera store and asking the person behind the counter questions about what kind of gear you should be looking at, or for that matter, about problems that you're having with your photographs. If you have the choice between doing that or going onto YouTube, I realize getting in your car, going to the camera store, it requires a little bit more effort, but I promise you the payoff is tenfold, because you're going to walk in there and you're going to get a personal one-on-one photography consultation and lesson from a person who, like yourself, is passionate about photography, and at a store where, of course, they want to sell things, but they don't have a future if they don't invest in your future in photography. And that's what these local retailers do. So look, I'm not saying this about Murphy's, I'm saying about all of them. You guys have heard me talk about, Precision Camera down in Austin, Texas, where I was recently. In fact, just found out today in May, you'll be seeing those dates show up on my website soon. I'm going to be in Little Rock, Arkansas at Bedford's, finally. I've done some presentations for Bedford's virtually, but I'm going to be a keynote speaker for their spring event. Super, super excited about that. These local retailers, they are the lifeblood of our industry when it comes to support as a photographer. So give them your business, right? It's totally worth your while, I promise you. So let's keep moving along. We've got the news, that's it. You've got my presentations, not a whole lot else going on. Let's move on to some DIY. So this week, my DIY piece is all about Velcro, right? Not quite that version of Velcro, right? But basically, it's this version of Velcro. Little Velcro dots, right? Which you can buy them in pretty big rolls like this. You can get them in smaller rolls. You can get them on little sheets. But for filters, and believe me, Velcro dots have a lot of uses, especially if you're doing any kind of studio work, even if you're just doing like temporary studio work, right? One of the ways that I use them is when I'm using 7-inch reflectors in the studio. You'll notice my reflector has, 3, so I'm missing a dot. I normally have 4 dots on them, okay, on each side, just to show you a close up. They're just, stuck on the unit, super simple, right? And then on my filters, and this is an older one where I have black squares. You can see this one there. There's a good view of the square, okay? When I want to put a filter on, all I simply have to do is hit one side, hit the other, boom. Filter's on. It's not going anywhere, right? Super, super simple. And by the way, this little piece right here, this 7-inch reflector, which does not collapse, and this gel, which does not collapse, and it doesn't have magnets on it, it's a fraction of the cost of those new Magmod units that I talked about last week. Not to mention, I actually, in person, got to see the Magmod case this past weekend for the new ones. I could easily fit 2 of these non-collapsible ones in a case the same size. So go figure, right? But anyway, also what I use the Velcro for, I digress. I will either use, in fact, actually, I use the dots on my light stands. C-stands, the ones that I use for my key lights. I will put a dot or 2 on the base section of the stand. In other words, not the parts that go up and down, because that becomes a problem as soon as you try to collapse the stand, right? So I put them on the base section. That way, when I'm shooting and when I'm working, if I take a gel off, I don't need to walk it all the way back to its place where it lives, which I'll explain that in a minute. But I also don't want to dump it on the floor or have it get stepped on or that kind of stuff. So I just stick it on the stand. So all of my main stands in the studio have a couple of these on, so that once I'm working, if I decide, you know what, I don't want yellow anymore, I want to go to red, I don't have to walk it all the way back. I can, or if I just want to take it off and don't want to gel at all, I just stick it on the dot until the end of the shoot when I clean up, and then I go put them away. I have a cabinet in my studio, which you can see in my home studio video on YouTube, where I have 2 long strips, 3/4 inch width of Velcro, and that's where I store my gels. I just simply stick them on the strips and kind of layer them going down, so they're always right there, readily available, easy to access. Velcro, it's your best friend. You can order this stuff. I've got links in the description below the video to the stuff that I use. I get it from Amazon, and I get it in bulk because I use a lot. I have a lot of ways that I will use Velcro, and I'll share more down the road, but I wanted to talk about gels and filters tonight, in part because you guys know I got a beef with Magmod over these new gels. I'm not gonna lie, because you know what? They're kind of cool. I obviously have a major issue with the price, but you know, there's potential. They could have done the industry a solid and made a ton of money, but they didn't. F89, where'd you get those gels? I had purchased some, but they were too thick. I got them on Amazon. You got to do a little bit of research when you buy your gels, because I'll be honest with you, I got these so long ago I don't remember, but I do know that there are thicker ones you can get. Generally speaking, when you look at listings for gels on Amazon, they will tell you the thickness of the gel. So, you know, you kind of need to pay attention to that. I find, and not making fun of you, I kind of find it's a lot like buying light stands, actually. I find so many photographers, when they're starting out and they're buying light stands, they don't actually pay attention to the specs on the light stand. So they wind up trying to save some money, and they buy a light stand that's, you know, only designed to hold like 3 pounds. And then they can't understand why, when they put a 4 or 5 pound light on it, plus a modifier that sticks out the front, they can't understand why the stand starts to, you know, bend or fall over, right? So it's kind of one of those things. The specs are there. You learned your lesson the hard way. And believe me, I've done the same thing years ago. I bought a bunch of gels and they were like super, super stiff. And I wound up using them for some other things. So it wasn't a waste of money. And I would encourage you, just because they're not going to serve the purpose that you intended, doesn't mean you couldn't do some cool stuff with them. For instance, get yourself a super sharp X-Acto knife, right? And cut a circle that's a little bit smaller than the diameter of your lens, and take that gel and hold it out in front of your lens a little bit with a white background, and you'll turn the background color, that white background, the color of the gel, but you'll get a soft fade and be able to see your subject with the white glow. So you can do a lot of cool stuff with those thick gels. It's just not easily going to attach to your reflectors with the Velcro like you saw me do this one. You do need the thinner ones. So anyway, that's the Velcro. That's the DIY tip. Simple one. Again, we'll have another one for you next week. Okay? So, reminder, all of you, you're part of a growing global community of photographers in over 100 countries who tune in to watch The Last Frame every week. And for that, I really appreciate you, but it would help a lot more people learn about The Last Frame if you could do me a solid, hit that thumbs up down below the video. The more thumbs up, the more YouTube recommends the show to other photographers. It's really just that simple. I promise it's not for my ego, okay? All right, let's look at our shoot breakdown for this week, okay? In fact, let me just grab the right image and switch my screen over here so I can show you that. So I picked this one this week mainly because I've had the question come up a few times of late, and that is, how much do you miss the live composite feature in the Olympus cameras, which a lot of you know that I did some kind of really cool light painted backgrounds while shooting portraits with live composite. And I'm not going to do the whole live composite breakdown. If you don't know what it is or you're curious, just Google Olympus live composite and you'll see tons about it. In fact, some of my pictures will probably show up, right? But the simple comparison is that with live composite, you can do the light painting with the lights on, right? And it's just kind of a lot easier. Without Olympus, you have to go back to kind of a little bit more traditional methods where you have to work in a darker space. So my image this week, the cover image, is this shot that you see here. And there's a bunch of things to unpack here in terms of how this was done. So let me break it down for you. First of all, gear. Camera was the Sony a7R IV. Shot with the Tamron 70 to 100 millimeter f2.8. Was at approximately 100 millimeter on the focal length of the lens. I was shooting in the studio, so if you've heard me talk about this before, that means I was shooting at f8. There is no real depth in this image. There's perceived depth because of the light painting, and I'll explain how I got that in a minute. But in terms of what the camera's dealing with, there's no depth that's happening. So I wanted the things to be in focus that are on the model. Her face, the glasses, ears, jewelry pieces, all of it. It is a 20-second exposure, ISO 100. The room lights are turned off, but the room is not completely dark. In my studio, which again you can see in the video on my home studio, there is a window that I simply have the blinds closed. That's it. So when the blinds are closed, they're white blinds. They're the thin white mini blinds, so they do not make the room perfectly dark. It's just a matter of the room is very dim. Because the room is that dim, I used single autofocus and basically focused and then, locked it in, right? So that the camera wasn't going to be hunting in the dark, okay? And during the 20-second exposure, I was using this gadget. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and switch back to the screen here. I was using this gadget that you see right here, okay? This is a light painting bottle from the company Light Painting Brushes. So lightpaintingbrushes.com. If you look down in the description below the video, their website URL is already there. And I was moving this both behind and in front of the model. In fact, if I go back to the shot here, I believe you can see or not. Yeah, you can see my cursor. Good. So obviously I came in front of her down here at the bottom, but in the top, I'm behind her. So what's cool about this particular gadget, it's actually three pieces that I'm dealing with here. The bottle has a little blue gel mounted in there, hence the blue collar. You can get these in different colors. This little rubber yoke is the mount or adapter. You just kind of push that on like so. And then I use a tactical flashlight. Now, these flashlights are not inexpensive. You can get cheaper ones. But this is an 1800 lumens, so it's bright, and that's a big part of why it's a little bit more expensive. This is about a $80 flashlight, right? It's a tactical flashlight. And one of the nice things is they're practically indestructible. They're super, super strong, okay? And you just slide it in, and then you have your whole setup, okay? Now, what's cool about this flashlight is when you turn it on, you have various power settings that you can do. And now here's the trigger warning. It's going to flash, right? You can also double tap and it will do a flash. So the way that that shot was done is using the blue bottle with the whoops, I may have literally just had the battery die in the middle of doing this, and I did. Oh, no, there we go. Okay, so the bottle glows, but then, and again, trigger warning, I'm going to use the flash, right? as I'm waving it and it's flashing, that's how we get the breaks that you see in the light, where it's basically turning on and turning off. So again, I'm in a very dim room, not pitch black, so I can see to move around. I don't have a scenario where I'm, going to trip over things and that kind of stuff. And it's a matter of experimenting, doing, multiple shots to get a feel for what kind of patterns are going to look interesting and what will work. I did use a very, very small fan aimed low. In other words, it's a little tiny fan about this big, and it's aimed kind of at chin level of the model, so it's pushing the hair back just a little bit, okay? And in fact, let me switch over here and I'll give you a sense of what I did with lighting. So the lighting setup, we've got 4 lights, okay? My key light is in a 33-inch round softbox. It's the Photox Ronnie, the 85 centimeter, 33-inch softbox. It's Godox 8200, of course, okay? Black background with another light and an orange gel set to create a little bit of a glow, and I'll go back to the image in a minute so that you can take a look at that. And 2 rim lights, one on either side, and high with orange gels on them to throw some orange back onto the model's dark brown hair, right? So all this is in a fairly, tight space, doesn't need a lot of room. That's the 10-foot circle that you always hear me mention. Again, this is not suggesting that you have to take your pictures in a 10-foot circle. It's just trying to show you can do this stuff actually in a relatively small space, right? You don't necessarily need a whole lot of space. I will say that for my normal style of shooting portraits, just so that you're getting a sense of that, I have the key light up here a little bit higher than I normally would. And I'll go back to the image and I will show you that she does have her chin lifted up slightly. And I'm actually shooting below her face. So I'm kind of working in opposite directions, but part of that was to be able to get the reflection that you'll see. The software program doesn't have wraparound sunglasses, so I can't duplicate the exact reflection in the software. But if you look up above me, you can see how I've got the bottom edges of that octabox reflecting in her glasses. So that's why I'm basically using them as a mirror, right? Light travels in a straight line. So the light's up a little bit higher, I'm a little bit lower, and that gives me the reflection in them. So if I go back to the image so that you guys can see it here, there we go. The cool part of it is the exclamation point of light. That was pretty much right out of camera. And I say pretty much, I will admit the bottom dot, I did a little bit of liquefy to clean up its shape. It was a little bit more elongated, but for the most part, the exclamation point happened in camera. It's just the way it worked out with these rounded wraparound sunglasses that I found literally for about $4 on Amazon. They were on clearance on Amazon. So the chokers around her neck, she's just basically wearing a tube top that's got a high neck, not a tube top, excuse me, a bodysuit that has a high neck. Those are just 2 pieces of trim material. So if you want to be able to find some of that kind of stuff on your own, and especially guys, if you're not like into materials and sewing, none of this is sewn. I didn't make anything. Just go to a fabric store and look for the section that's called trim, right? And if you're not sure where that is, just ask somebody there, where can I find the trim? And you'll find a whole aisle of these little thin bits of materials and all kind of cool stuff with different colors and that. And to wrap it around a person's neck, all you need is about 1 foot, 12 inches, right? Because you have to have a little bit extra so you can clamp it in the back. I use the little tiny clamps that I've shown you before, and I clamp the stuff in the back and kind of make my own. So in this case, I've got 2 of them stacked because I didn't want just the kind of loose, kind of faux turtleneck collar that the bodysuit had. It was kind of a short turtleneck. So I wanted to have something a little bit more interesting. So that's how I set that up. So basically, this shot's done in camera. Again, a little bit of liquefy on the dot at the bottom of the exclamation point, but it's not a composite with 2 different backgrounds. It's not multiple images put together to get the painting. It's simply a matter of setting up the shot and then doing multiple shots. I probably did this about 15 times to work out the kind of pattern that I wanted. And there you have it. Okay. So the light painting stuff can be done just as easily with Sony or Canon or Nikon. It's not just an Olympus thing. But I find that I routinely get people coming back and saying, hey, you used to do that with Olympus, but you don't do it anymore. I did it with Olympus to basically prove that it was something you could do with Olympus, and because Olympus was the only company that has that live composite feature. But every time I did it, if you go back and look at the videos, I mentioned that you can do what I was doing in the shots, the finished image. You could do it with any camera brand. The Olympus feature just made it easier, right? So that was basically that piece. All right. So let's chat. What have you guys been up to? What are you struggling with? How can I help you with your photography? I had a couple good questions come in already, and actually had a couple questions pop up on Facebook this week. So let's do the ones for the people that are here. But seriously, I love solving problems. One of the ways to success in photography is to learn problem solving, right? So I do this and I enjoy doing it. One, because it keeps my problem solving instincts sharp. But two, hopefully I can impress on you and help you kind of learn the process. Because believe me, if you learn the process of problem solving as a photographer, you'll need YouTube and Google a whole lot less, I promise. Okay, so let's see, going back to the beginning of the evening here, right actually before we went live, Madeline in the UK had a great question. I'm just going to drop it in there. My question is, what color should I paint my studio / desk area, and what is the best lighting to install? So Madeline, while I begin answering the first part of the question here, I'm going to hope that you're still here because I know it's late in the UK. And if you are, just answer me one question while I'm beginning to talk. And that question is with regards to what lighting to install. Do you just mean basic room lighting, ambient light, not your studio lighting, right? Confirm that for me. So there are two well, there's maybe more than two, but there are two primary considerations when you are picking paint colors for a studio space, right? Begins with, is it a dedicated studio space? Is it a multi-use space, meaning it's also your living room when you're not shooting in it? If it's like a studio in your basement of your house, like the studio that I have downstairs, at some point, somewhere down the road, this house will probably need to be sold, right? Hopefully I don't have to go through that, but eventually that's going to happen. So the question becomes, do I want to have to repaint that space before that would happen, right? So those are all things to consider. So I'm going to give you a couple different answers to your question, Madeline. When I rented a 2,000 square foot studio, that studio was white. All the walls, all the ceilings. One, because it was massive. Two, because the ceilings were 14 feet high, which meant that basically the walls and the ceiling had no impact on the photographs at all. The only exception in terms of wall color was the back wall of the studio, which was gray. Okay. So that was the only exception. It was a neutral gray. My studio downstairs currently is all white. It's a shooting space that is approximately 13 feet wide by about 27 feet long. Okay, so Madeline did write back. It's going to be completely studio space, not living space, on the first floor with big windows, which I will put shutters on. Great. So another question about the windows, Madeline. Are there what direction do those windows face? Are they north facing, south, east, west? Which direction do they face? That's a very important consideration for a photography studio. Okay. So As far as the wall colors in my current studio, they're all white, ceiling's white, but I'm actually about to change that. I've been in the process of removing some of the many things that I have mounted on the walls and hooks and that I put in the ceiling. And I've been, spackling over some of it because some of it's not going back up. I just really don't have a need for it. And in part because it's just time in general to do kind of a touch up of the room. So I am going to make a tweak. Even though I just said a minute ago, at some point, there's the potential that the house will need to be sold. If that were the case, you normally wouldn't want to do like a black or a gray ceiling. But my game plan at this point, since I'm no longer shooting modeling portfolios as my primary source of income, when I built that studio, that's what I was doing. I am going to paint the walls white except for one end, which will be a neutral gray, just like I just described in my bigger studio that I had previously. And the ceiling is also going to be a dark gray. I'm not going to go with black, but I'm going to go with a really dark gray. The reason I'm doing that is, as I've talked about before, and as you see in the video that I did, it's a very low ceiling. It's actually just under 8 feet. So when I was doing the modeling portfolios, having the white ceiling was actually great for being able to bounce light off of, get nice, soft, even light, which is what I needed for the majority of the modeling portfolio images that I was doing. If you've heard me talk about modeling portfolios before, you remember modeling portfolios are not about how creative is the photographer. That doesn't help the model, right? Modeling portfolios are about the model's ability to act, to look convincingly like a specific character in an advertisement. That's what a portfolio is about. So having the white ceiling and having the white walls in a small space worked out incredibly well. It just made life easy. A lot of times I could do shots literally just with bounce flash, and the light was amazing, right? Now that I'm doing primarily the fashion portraiture and things like that, and I'm doing it for the purpose of creating these images which I use to teach, every now and then that white wall becomes a bit of a liability, or excuse me, the white ceiling a bit of a liability. Not that I can't control it, and in theory I could put some material on it or something, but which is way too much work. It just means that I have to pay a little bit more attention to the inverse square law to make sure that it's not contributing to the lighting in my shot. So by going to a dark gray ceiling, that will just make that easier. So I am going to repaint the room, medium gray at one end, dark gray on the ceiling, and then white on the sides and at the other end. As far as the ambient light in a room, unless you have a space, of course, it's like an old warehouse where you've got big, not skylight windows, but big, huge warehouse windows. I would encourage you to just make sure that the room is well lit. And I would encourage you to use daylight color balance bulbs. Now, what do I mean by well lit, and then why daylight color balance? So let's do it backwards. Daylight color balance is easy. That way you are seeing the colors and you are seeing the makeup the way that you are going to photograph them, especially if you're shooting with strobes, right? Because they're daylight balanced. So ideally you would want the light to have the same color temperature. That way, the way you perceive the colors in front of you is exactly how the camera is going to perceive the colors that it records, as opposed to you having tungsten lighting where everything's basically being viewed, you're viewing everything essentially through a yellow filter with tungsten light. So the color relationships are going to look different than in your picture than they do to your eyes. So if you shoot primarily strobes, then, or daylight balanced LEDs, then use daylight balanced bulbs. Beyond that, it doesn't matter where you place the bulbs or anything like that, because I don't realize, like, I literally, in my shooting space, again, 13 feet wide, 27 feet deep, I just have 3 light cans. In other words, the recessed lights in the ceiling, each with a daylight bulb. But that's not a lot of light in the shooting space at all. And then there's the window that I mentioned, which that window basically, since this is a basement studio, That's an egress window, meaning that window's partly underground. There's a well around it that's painted white so that it helps, kick some light in, right? But the real deciding factor, and it has become an issue with my Sony cameras. It was not an issue with Olympus. It was occasionally an issue with Nikon, but with Sony, it's been an issue since I started back with Sony. You need enough light in the room that the camera's autofocus is going to be able to lock on quickly, efficiently, and it's not going to have to hunt, right? So you can't be working in dim lighting if you want the autofocus to be quick and to be accurate. So you need the room to be well lit, right? Now, variations on that would be like if you're doing a lot of time exposure to light painting or that, then, we get into some other scenarios. But for general portrait work, models, that kind of stuff, yeah, you want the room to be well lit. I would keep the room brighter. And by the way, part of keeping the room brighter is also learning how to use the room as a modifier. The walls, all of it, right? That's very useful. So Madeline, I asked about which direction does the window go. You are for southeast window, you are going to want to put blinds or shades on the window because a southeast window does get direct sunlight coming through the window. Now I get it, you're in the UK, so you have a lot of days without direct sunlight. You get a lot of cloudy days, but still on the days where you get direct sunlight, it's very possible you'll have a subject sit down for a portrait and you're going to have sunlight streaming through the window and hitting them. So you're going to want shades, and I would encourage you to use room darkening shades so that you have the ability to take the sunlight out of the question. I saw, let's see here, Black Book Lens asked regarding north, south, east, west windows. Let me just pull that back up again here. Which would be the best scenario to have? So Black Book Lens, if you have the choice, north-facing windows for photography are the best, simply because north-facing windows never get direct sunlight streaming through the window, right? Because they face north. So the sun rises in the east, sets in the west, and it arcs slightly to the south, right? So east-facing windows, west-facing windows, south-facing windows at different times of the day will have light streaming through the window on a bright sunny day. North-facing windows don't. If it's a big enough window, you may get a little bit at sunrise, a little bit at sunset, but basically you can go through the whole day. If you guys go back a couple of years to the beginning of the pandemic and some of my videos here on YouTube, I was leasing a warehouse studio in an old cigar factory here in Allentown that they've turned it into kind of an art community. And I got extremely lucky and got a corner spot with north-facing windows, which was just absolutely awesome, because you don't have to cover them unless you're trying to do like light painting and that. You don't have to cover those windows or anything. They're just going to give you amazing light. And so I was actually doing a lot of work, even some of my beauty and fashion portrait work, I was doing it without studio lighting because it's awesome. Okay. So, Madeline, I hope that helps. Basically white, depending on the height of your ceiling and also how you like to light. So the moral to the story is here, there's no one simple one-size-fits-all answer, okay? Because it depends not only on the size of the room, it depends on what you're going to shoot. It depends on whether or not you're using the room at any point in time as a background, as a physical background, like a wall. It depends if you're going to use the room as a modifier to reflect light, which are all things that I do. It doesn't mean you have to do that, right? The easiest way to make sure that your room is not impacting your picture in any way would be to paint it all black, right? Matte black, by the way, not glossy black, matte black. I'm not recommending you do that because it's going to make your room feel like a cave. But if you painted the room all black, then it's not going to reflect any light. So all the lighting and all the modification of lighting has to come from you, your lights, and your modifiers, right? The room's not going to impact it at all. One of the things you should consider is, should I go with glossy paint? Should I go with matte paint? So in my studio currently, which is all white currently, it's all semi-gloss paint because I don't like matte paint because it's easier to smudge, but in a photography studio, you got to think a little bit differently. So I went with semi-gloss because even if I use a wall, which is white as a background, it doesn't matter if I get any highlights on the white because I'm going to overexpose the white. It's a white background, right? Um, the wall that I'm about to make gray, that will be matte gray, because if it's semi-gloss, then I'm going to be very limited in where I can place my lights. Otherwise, I'm going to get reflections back off the semi-gloss gray, which will look horrible. Same with the ceiling, which is going to be the dark gray. That will also be matte. Not that the ceiling is going to be in any pictures, but at the same time, I don't want it to have any additional reflectivity. I'm going with the dark gray to basically prevent the ceiling from reflecting light. And you might ask, well, why not just go, with matte black? For the same reason I said a minute ago, not to do the whole room black. It's a small space. It's going to feel smaller even with the darker gray. Black is going to make it feel even smaller yet. So it's really psychology that I'm just trying to avoid going all the way to black, because I know that even by adding the gray in, it's going to make the room start to feel a little bit smaller. The piece in my current studio that I regret is I have a wooden floor. I let myself get bullied by the contractors, and I shouldn't have. When they were building the house, I asked them to put the drywall, because we had custom designed the space in the basement for the studio. And I requested that they put the drywall on the floor, right? So there was no gap. If you've ever seen a house built and if they fit out the basement, they always leave the drywall about a half an inch to an inch off the floor. It doesn't touch the floor. The reason for that is if the basement floods with just a little bit of water, it won't ruin the drywall, because the drywall acts like a sponge, soaks up the water, and then you'll get mold. Well, the house has a sump pump in it. All the homes in my township are required to have sump pumps, but also the way our house sits, the only way I'm ever going to get water in my basement is if one of the basement walls fails. In other words, if it cracks and leaks. I'm not in a spot where I'm going to get any flooding at all. In fact, there's a big retaining pond 15 feet beyond my backyard that is designed to take water and drainage. And it's never come close to overflowing towards our house at all, because we're kind of part way down a big hillside, right? So I went round and round with them and couldn't get them to agree to do it. And I was not in the mood to have to do all that myself at that point. So my option was not put a floor down, and then basically use filler to fill in the gap at the bottom and paint the concrete floor, which is what I really kind of wanted to work with. Or I had this extra flooring, and it's like, oh, you know what? I'll put the flooring in. I really wish I had the concrete floor that I could paint a glossy gray. That's what I had in my old studio, and I loved that. It was just great to work with. But yeah, do make sure that if you are going to use like a wood floor or any kind of a linoleum floor or tile, be careful of the color, right? So that you're not kicking weird light back up. The wood floor that I have, it's brownish yellow, right? So that it could kick that color up. But since I do mostly portrait work and the light is much closer to the subject than it is the floor, it's not a problem. It's never caused me an issue, but that is something to consider, right? So, all right, let's see here. Charlie L mentioned, whoops, there it is. My studio is all white except for the floor. Since it's also small with an 8-foot ceiling, I frequently bounce light off the walls and our ceiling to get softer, wider light sources. Yep, and that's exactly what I demonstrate in that video about my home studio. So, Rob Trek, looking at foggers to maybe use with gobos. Any recommendation on the fogging devices themselves? Yeah, don't. Literally, if you're working like in a home studio, Rob, The problem you're gonna get, like, because right now is an easy time to buy foggers. You can walk into any Halloween store and you'll find tons of different fog machines, right? The problem with all the fog machines is they create way too much smoke way too fast, and you can't control it. You will fill up your room wicked fast, and then you're stuck. So number one, you better have an open window, and you're gonna need a fan, two fans, one at the window to suck air out, and then another one across the room to push the smoke towards the window. It's a pain in the butt. Believe me, made that mistake many times. If you are able to safely do it, working in your home, or if you're out on location, work with canned smoke. The canned smoke is great. It's called atmosphere aerosol. It's outstanding because it will linger in the air, and you can control it much, much, much easier. But here's what you have to be careful of. So you've been forewarned, since you heard about it from me. It's highly flammable. So do not use it like, I can't use it in my studio downstairs because in the closet in my studio is the heater for my home, meaning there's an open flame, right? So if I were to use that, I'd likely blow my house up. So don't do that aspect of it. But if you're shooting outside, you could use a fogger outside, but even then, it's still extremely hard to control where the stuff goes. So it really depends on the shot that you're after and just how much fog you need. But yeah, go to the Halloween stores now. Now's the time of year to find tons of them, and even a lot of times right after Halloween, you find stuff on sale. Gabe asks, does it set off the smoke detectors? No, because smoke detectors actually are able to tell smoke from something that's burning, as opposed to just kind of that stuff. The stuff that's that comes out of the foggers, it's a chemical reaction, and I don't remember exactly what the chemicals are. But no, I've used it in spaces where there are smoke detectors, and I've never had it set off a smoke detector. But I try to avoid it at all costs at this point. It's just kind of more hassle than it's worth. And I could say that only because, yeah, I've done all the smoke stuff and kind of got it out of my system. But yeah, it never set off a smoke alarm for me. Okay. So let's see. I'm scrolling back here. I had a couple others that came in early. Scrolling up. Craig, watching from Snohomish, Washington. Hope our new boy Kenmore Cameron will have you back soon. Hey, I would love to come back to Washington. In fact, I am going to be in Tacoma, Washington, Greg, which I realize that's a little bit of ways, I believe. But I'm going to be there in March. So as soon as that information is available, I will have it online, but I'll be doing a day or two with the Washington Professional Photographers Association. And if it's like most of those events, it will be open to the public. But I don't know exactly what they're charging, and we haven't done the contracts yet, but it's basically, it's a done deal. It's going to happen. As soon as I get everything finalized, I will talk about it. So you may have to do a little bit of a drive. The challenge with the camera stores, and this is nothing against the camera stores, it's not their fault. I've had a ton of people in the last 2 weeks like, are you going to be talking at the Build Expo, which is the new event that B&H is doing? And my answer is highly doubtful. Simply because 2 years ago, as you know, I dropped all sponsorships. I'm not sponsored by anybody. I have an arrangement with Tamron to do some education for them, but I'm not sponsored by Tamron. I'm not one of their ambassadors. And I do not want to be sponsored by anyone. It was a very conscious decision, just like the conversation we've been having about MagMod and the price of things. Somebody's got to be holding these companies accountable, because photographers as a group tend to be a bit stupid with the way they spend money on stuff, period. Sorry, just keeping it real, right? So at these larger events, and like even the events that Kenmore does, like when I was there a couple years ago for Olympus, Kenmore doesn't pay for that. It would be really pricey for them to pay to bring all the speakers in. Olympus paid. Olympus paid me for my speaking fees. They paid for my hotel. They paid for my air travel, all that kind of stuff. And it's the same with Build. Obviously, B&H has the power that they can go to every one of these manufacturers and say, hey, one, you're going to be here, and two, we need you to provide a speaker or speakers. And it's B&H who sells incredible volume of stuff. So these companies are providing speakers. So this build event, it's the beginning of September, and I apologize, I don't have all the information because I've kind of given up paying attention. All that stuff I just know because I keep seeing the ads for it. It looks like it's going to be better than what Photo Plus was. So I'll admit, I have a little bit of FOMO because they were great events, but yeah, I will not be speaking because it's very unlikely that someone is going to pay me to speak when I'm not sponsored by them. So let's see here. There was one other one way back here. Scrolling back. Oh, that's Pateo had a question. How do you deal with customers who ask after the shoot for different options or modifications that were not planned for on the contract? So there's a couple things you do, Pateo. It sounds like you maybe just had that happen to you, in which case it's kind of too late to do the ultimate situation. And I'll get to the ultimate situation in a second. But what you're going to do is you're going to calmly, politely, respectfully start your response with something along the lines of, well, that's not part of what we discussed or outlined in the contract. I can definitely do that for you. It will require additional time on my part, potentially, depending on what they're asking for, additional resources or expenses. So, it will cost this, right? And it may be a matter if they want an extra 6 images retouched, right? So you should either have a flat fee, which is honestly a lot easier for retouching an image, or you should have an hourly fee. But with an hourly fee for retouching images, you still need to be able to give them an estimate of, well, I charge this much an hour to do the retouching, and I would expect I could get those 6 images done in this much time, right? So they have a sense of what it's going to be. So I mean, it's simply a matter of a polite conversation. Now, that also means that before you do any work with clients, your contracts need to be thorough and detailed, right? Photographers tend to be really lazy with stuff like that. It's like, yeah, I'm going to shoot and I'll give you this. And, it's just this whole open-ended thing, right? No, you've got to be really clear. And there should be a statement in your contract that says, additional services above and beyond the scope of what are outlined here will be charged above and beyond the scope, at a rate of X number of dollars per hour. Okay. It is advisable, in my opinion, for you as a photographer to have essentially kind of an auxiliary price list. In other words, cost per image or cost per hour for additional retouching. Again, if you do it by the hour, you've got to be able to give estimates of, well, how long does it take to retouch an image, right? What would make an image take longer if that's the case, right? Or, if you do it as a straight up fee, maybe you have a fee for basic retouching, and then, there's an additional fee for, additional skin retouching or face modifications, whatever. That's a whole different conversation, right? But once you sign the contract with the client and you've made them your client, it's a good idea to provide that for them. Or when you deliver the product, right, provide that. But you need to have that language in the contract because, believe me, even I've had clients on the day of a shoot where, you're contracted to do 3 images, right? And you estimated out that you can get those 3 images done in let's say 3 hours, right? But then the day the shoot comes and the client doesn't want 3 images, they want 6 images, right? Well, even if you could get the 6 images done in 3 hours, the question is, how did you build them? Did you build them by the hour? Or did you build them by the image, right? Or did you build them straight up? Here's the fee for 3 images, right? So then, if you're building them by the hour and you can get the 6 images done in 3 hours and that's what you build them for, then that's you providing value to your client. If your contract stated that you were going to retouch those 3 images, it should say in the contract that, we're going to shoot for 3 hours. I'm going to retouch 3 images. That's the plan, right? That way, if you shoot 6, anything above and beyond, they're going to have to pay to retouch the additional 3, right? So it's all about having the language built in advance. If you've just learned that lesson the hard way because a client has come back and wanted all kinds of other things that they didn't contract you for, then it's simply a matter of understanding you've got to have the polite conversation with the client and say, listen, we contracted to do this. This is what we agreed upon. And even if you don't have all those details spelled out in a contract, hopefully you have an email thread where the client was saying, this is what we need and this is what we're going to do, et cetera, right? Where you're going back and forth. And he's basically saying, look, here are the things that we agreed upon. This is what I told you I would charge you for it. Now you're asking for this, this, and this. I can gladly do those things. Those are all things that I am able to do, but that requires more time and more effort, which I have to bill you for, right? And you approach it that way. So, and then obviously, Pateo, from this point forward, this is the good kind of assumption. Assumptions get us in trouble. But sometimes in business, there are certain things that you should always assume. You should always assume that the scope of the project will change when it actually happens, right? You should always assume that the client is going to want to add things, not because they're trying to get one over on us or rip us off, just because that kind of stuff happens, right? So those are things you should assume and anticipate that they're going to take place. So that means that you want to try and head off as much of that stuff as possible prior to the shoot. So Beverly, your talk on correct exposure looks like it's an out-of-town class. Is there any way it can be viewed? Do you have a YouTube already on the subject? No, Beverly, but I've done that talk several times where I've offered it through my website. I'm trying to see here. Who am I doing that for? Because a lot of the camera clubs do allow you to sign. Oh, the correct exposure one in Williamsport. Yes, that's actually a live in-person talk in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. So you need to be there for that. I will be offering that particular talk, which honestly is a talk that's really important to me right now because so many people, and this actually came up, folks know I was down in Virginia this past weekend for an event with the Virginia Professional Photographers Association, which is a lot of fun. Always enjoy those kind of events. Even got to go see a minor league baseball game, which was a bonus. So, but the conversation of exposure came up, and I'm not going to lie to you, it is mind-boggling how many people with mirrorless cameras are just using their cameras the wrong way in terms of how they set exposure. And part of that is because they're learning on YouTube. They're learning on the internet. And you're not seeing the distinctions, number one, between film and DSLR and mirrorless when you find your stuff on the internet. And there's still a lot of photographers actively walking around teaching exposure the old way. So, yeah. It's about correct exposure for mirrorless cameras and what correct exposure really means and how you really achieve it. So keep an eye on my live streams here. Obviously, when I offer it again next year, I will talk about it. And then also bookmark that page with all the speaking engagements on my website. The only other way that you could see it, Beverly, is if you join my Tog Knowledge community for it's less than $7 a month. Or it is $7 a month, excuse me, less than, it's $7 a month, literally. You can see a recorded version of it. And then while you won't be able to ask questions during the recorded version, in the community, you have access to me. So, and that's honestly one of the biggest benefits of joining Tog Knowledge, folks. In fact, I'll share the link here so you can learn all about it if you haven't had a chance to see it up. There is a 7-day free trial, okay? But once you're a paid member, you have access to recordings of many of my presentations, and the correct exposure presentation is in there, okay? All right, I'm going to be late here, but we're going to do Charlie's question, and then I'm going to wrap it up. Have you ever used a camera stand as a studio alternative to a tripod? Yes, I use one. I use the Cheetah Stand one and love it. He said he recently found 2 with 6-foot high poles, and he's fixing them up. So far in small studio, seems to be a better alternative. Yeah, I use the Cheetah Stand, camera stand. Absolutely love it. I was very fortunate in the old studio that I leased, the big one, the 2,000 square foot one. The photographer who owned it, who had been one of my early mentors, he had one of the old heavy duty Cambo um, camera stands, which I fell in love with it. I mean, it's so much easier than a tripod. I've hated tripods forever. I still hate tripods. Sometimes you have no choice, right? But yeah, the camera stands are just amazing. The Cheetah stand is super small. It's lightweight. You can even actually pack it up fairly functionally and go on location with it if you need to. But yeah, I'm a huge fan. If and for those of you who maybe don't know what I'm talking about here, let me switch the browser over really quick. On my website, I believe it's in here. If you look underneath my bio, there's a link called my current gear, and if you scroll down, yep, there it is, the Cheetah stand, pistol stand, and that'll take you to their website where you can get all the info on it, right? So, in fact, here, let's see if I can give you guys the link here. Whoop, that's not the link. Sorry. Well, actually, yeah, that's the link to all my gear, and then you can click through there and go through. But yeah, Charlie, I'm a big fan of camera stands over tripods in a studio. And it's not just even about a room with small space. It's about the fact that I trip over tripods way too easy, and then things are really chaotic. I still trip over a camera stand from time to time, but it's not going to go flying all over the place like a tripod does because it's a completely different design setup. So, all right, gang, we are out of time. Thank you for watching. Thank you for coming by. And as always, I hope you found some value in what I shared tonight. If you still haven't done so, please, real quick, just a thumbs up. It helps more photographers find out about the show. And remember, you don't get back the days that you waste. So please, go pick up that camera and shoot something, because your best shot, it's your next shot. Adios, gang. Take care.